So before we do a little exercise, I want to start with the why. Why is contemplation and discernment at this moment of the paschal mystery journey? Why is it so important? Well, very simply because we have to understand that we are not only in a time of change, and some of you have heard me say this before. Definition of change straight out is that it uses the past as the reference point. And one of the best examples we have in religious life right now in the States, and also in Canada, in Ireland, and in Australia, in the global north, is what are we doing with our temporal goods, our buildings and things like that. Paint them a different color, put different people in them as users. That's all good. It's change. We use the past as the reference point. There isn't a choice on our part about change. Change is going to come whether you like it or not. Anybody not agree? Take a look in the mirror, okay? You really don't have a whole lot of control over change, okay? Change is about external activity for the most part. It's about various tweaks. You know, I can change my diet, change my hair color, change the purpose of this room. It's all good. Change is not really at a deeper level by way of substance. It's important, but it's not substantial. And the most important thing about change are the last two phrases up there. When you change something, you end up with the same form and the same function. I still have a head of hair, it still covers my head, and it is now gray instead of brown. That is a change, okay? We still have the building, different people in it, and different use. It's still the building. Same form, same function, okay? And please notice my neutral tone is not good or bad, right or wrong. That's what changes. Times of transformation, very different character. Very different character. Transformation is when you use the future as a reference point, which is why trusting an unknown future to a known God is just about the only way for us to go. Because the only person, if you will, that has a sense of the future, we believe, is God. So when we say that we're committing ourselves to the transformational process, it has something to do with using the future as our reference point. And what's in the future? In terms of a piece of paper and a plan? Nada. Nothing. Nothing that we can figure out anyhow. It's very challenging. Transformation is also the capacity for us to choose it or not. Transformation will not just happen. In other words, we can say no to it. We can say, I don't want that kind of change. I don't want that kind of journey. Transformation is much more an internal activity. Something happens to us inside, just like that father and son. Something happened to them personally, and then in their relationship as father and son. We couldn't see it necessarily. It was internal. Transformation is always essential and core stuff. It's not about painting a room a different color. Transformation is about essential core kinds of things. And again, the last two phrases up here are probably the most helpful, at least to me, to hold on to this. In transformation, you always end up with new form and new function. In other words, if you didn't know what it was previously, you would never recognize it in its transformational stage. Which is why a caterpillar to a butterfly is the best example of transformation. The future is the reference point, no choice, internal activity, the core of that caterpillar is totally given over. Mackenzie once told me, or asked me, said, you know what happens in metamorphosis, Aunt Carol? And I said, no, which was a mistake, of course, because I got the whole 4th grade science lesson. Aunt Carol, do you know what goes on in the chrysalis? I said, no. She said, it's disgusting. And she proceeded to tell me they now have MRIs of what goes on in a chrysalis. And, you know, in her little 4th grade mind, that was a good description, you know. Everything that the caterpillar was is gone. And out of that goneness, something totally other gets created. If you did not know that a butterfly was once a caterpillar, when you look at a butterfly, you wouldn't believe anybody if they told you that was once a caterpillar. Okay? So that's why it's a good example of transformation. The reason I'm saying this is we are in a time of transformation. Across all sectors, religions, not just the Catholic Church is having troubles, you know, okay? Again, across all religions, across politics, economies, governments, education, healthcare, families, you name it. There is a huge shift going on, especially in Western culture. It's a time of transformation. And so our approach usually, and this works for times of change, is to have discussion, debate. Anybody here good at that? Yes, we're very good at that, you know. Typically, women religious could discuss their way in and out of anything, you know. And it's about decision. And this is not a time for decision. This is a time for discernment. What do I mean by that? Discussions and debate and decisions are rational processes. Now, believe me, I'm not saying leave your rational self outside. Discussion, debate, decisions are very left-brained, which is good, very logical. It's outcomes-based, it's predictable, and mostly it can be controlled. That's the part we like. We want to be in charge, which is not a bad thing. Okay? We're in times, though, where being in charge and predicting everything and saying if we do A, then B and C will happen. And we're not in those kind of times. If we do A, shoes and turkeys might happen, you know? We have absolutely no clarity about doing A and it will produce B and C. It just is not that way. Contemplation, like that father and son were doing, is taking a long, that's the best definition of contemplation, to take a long, loving look at reality, at the church, at religious life, at Brentwood, at Philadelphia, at President Trump, at the southern border, at Saudi Arabia. I mean, whatever it is, take a long, loving look at it until you can see what God sees. Now, you try that for a little while on what you're looking at. Okay? Contemplation is, so it's a practice. It's a practice. Contemplation also demands stillness of mind and heart and will. Oh my goodness, what a trifecta that is for us. Very left-brained, very successful, first world, global north, very high achievers. Very hard for us to still our mind, our heart, and our will. Contemplation also demands a silence inside of us and beyond us. Probably the silence outside of us is easier to achieve than the silence inside of us. And the last 2 points here are probably the takeaways, at least, that helps me. Contemplation is about listen, listen, listen. 2 ears, 1 mouth, for a reason. We should listen twice as much as we speak. Contemplation demands listening more than speaking. And finally there, the word contemplation itself, contemplare, means to carve out a space for the sacred. So part of the work, sisters and associates, and my brother who's here, part of the work of contemplation right now is to keep carving out a space in our own mind and heart and will, personally and then collectively, for God to take up residence and for God to lead this journey. This is not a journey that we're in charge of. And the more we can get out of the way, the more apt we might be of having God take us where God needs us to be. And more than likely, it's not going to look anything like what we think it should. That's always a good little test. If something turns out the way we think it probably should, then we might want to be a little dubious about whether it is of God or of me. Discernment. One of the things about discernment, and my dear sister Karen Doyle, who lived with your sisters for many years in Jamaica, she's a retreat director. One of the things she said about discernment most recently is that in a discernment process, you do not make up your mind. That's a decision. There's no making up your mind in a discernment process. A discernment process is always between goods. It's always between this call or this call. And it's not a matter of this call is calling me to God and this one's calling me to evil. No, discernment will never be between good and bad. That's a decision. Discernment is always between goods, which is why it's so challenging. It comes from the word to separate, as you know, rooted in the Latin, to actually be able to pull apart to see where is the call of God for us. It has to do with an ability to perceive, and perceive beyond our senses. So a lot of it isn't going to make sense to our rational minds. So if you try to rationalize your way through discernment, you're going to hit a wall at about 100 miles an hour. Okay? That's not the process. The process is the ability to be able to perceive, like kind of under the words. For instance, if I said to you, that this table up here, if I said, what are your favorite colors? And the colors were, red, purple, blue, and, yellow. Right? And if I said to this table here, what did they just say their favorite colors are? Right? At a rational level, you'd repeat back to me their colors. At a perception level, you would say, what I heard them say is vitality, and bold, and colors that demand attention. Do you see the difference? Okay? Discernment is always about perception. So you have to listen under the words. It's about nuanced insights. In discernment, something's probably not going to come down and hit you over the head. It's going to be much more nuanced than that. And it's the ability in this last dot here to see and recognize that which is not readily apparent by way of the stuff we like to use, which is data. We love data, don't we? And feelings. Please hear me say data and feelings are part of it, but they're only a part of it. So what we're going to engage now for the time between now and lunch is really from the mystical contemplative life. It is an opportunity to kind of be together in the heart of God, to be in this contemplative, communal discernment space. And what I want to just invite you to consider is, as we experience ourselves as a whole on, as part of something larger and larger, imagine the families who are struggling with whatever they might be struggling with, if they could sit around a table as a family. Imagine our Congress, if they could sit around, metaphorically, a table, and just be in this kind of listening and trying to listen to where is God calling us. So again, just kind of don't think of this just for yourselves. And of course, what the cosmology tells us is that everything we do affects the energy in the universe. So for anybody who feels like this is just more talk, and what are we going to accomplish? You're putting energy out there in the universe that is contemplative and healing. So you're already changing the world. Okay? And it's only 11 o'clock in the morning, so good on you, as they say in Australia. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just kind of get into this mode of really saying yes to a way of life, to this contemplative way of living, a way of relating, and really to a way of the heart. I'm not going to ask you to do this either, but in some ways it might be a good image for you to keep in mind as you engage with each other. And you can keep to yourself who at your table you think is which. That will just be between you and your God, But this is a process where you carry each other and look at where you're going, on a rope that there's no turning back, at least that's not in view, and not really sure where it's headed either. Okay, so I don't know, but sometimes pictures just really help me a lot. This is an experience of carrying each other. I'm not going to ask you to do this either. But I have a friend of mine who is an acrobat, and one of the things that he has helped me to understand is that this is an incredible discipline. And it is an experience of trust, vulnerability, hope, confidence, joy, carrying each other, no going back, and not sure what's going to happen next. Okay? Basically, he has said to me that this is an exercise in physics. That space between their two outreached arms, a lot of images have the word trust written in there. That what he has said to me, though, is that there is, I can't tell you the mathematical number, but it is like the minutest aspect of a millisecond where each of those artists has to intuit when it is time to let go and when it is time to reach out. And they have that minuscule aspect of a millisecond to both make the decision and do it. And if they miss, what he said is that he has seen shoulders pulled out and wrists pulled out. In other words, that sweet spot, which is what they call it, the sweet spot of trust, takes what Malcolm Gladwell talked about in his book, Outliers. It takes about 10,000 hours of practice. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a very interesting piece. He said he did some research on why Canadians are such good hockey players. And one of the things he found out is that by the time most Canadian young boys especially are in 7th grade, they've been on the ice 10,000 hours. When musicians all over the world audition for a symphony, it's always a blind audition. The 3 people that are judging, the person that's auditioning is in front of a screen. And typically the professionals know in the first 3 notes whether that person has passed the 10,000 hour practice mark. Point. There's something about a skill being developed that needs at least 10,000 hours. And my friend told me that every partner that these people work with, it's another 10,000 hours. It's not like once you get it with one partner, then you have it with the next partner. Okay? I share that because what we're going to experience today is far from 10,000 hours of practice of contemplative communal discernment. So, for those of us in the room who are, probably nobody in this room, but I'll tell you, lots of us are like antsy with this kind of stuff. It's like, oh God, just come on, get on with it. I'm going to share what I think, share the state of the heart, and yeah, God's moving on my life, and no, this is not that. Okay. So the process is this. There is what's referred to as a home table, which is where you are now. Okay. And at the home table, there obviously are diverse individuals. You're going to engage in a process of contemplative listening and speaking. And the listening, of course, is you're listening simply to understand. And if you want to test whether you're listening or not, if you've got a little voice in the back of your head that's saying, it's 5 after 11, I should have gotten another cup of coffee. I'm not sure if I'll make it to lunchtime. You're not listening, okay? So it's a little way of testing, so really listening. You listen simply to understand, not listening to say, oh, yep, I agree with that. Oh, yep, she's been saying that for 37 years, not surprised. Oh, nope, that's a stupid thing. Oh, that's never going to work, So you need 10,000 hours of practice to really listen. And speaking in contemplative work is simply speaking to be understood. You don't speak to convince. It's a totally different reason for speaking. And there's no talking, by the way, in contemplative work. You don't talk, you speak. And did you see the movie A League of Their Own several years ago, the baseball team, and Tom Hanks was the coach, I forget who the actress was, but she got out at second base and she started to cry on second base. Tom Hanks comes running out of the dugout and he said, are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying in baseball. There is no crying in baseball. There is no talking in contemplative processes. You speak. Okay? And one of the practices is to pause in between, and I know you know this rule book because you've been practicing it. Pause in between. Listen to the I that's on its way to a we. So listen to each individual, but begin listening not for, okay, now she said 3 of the same things and she said 4 of the same things. We got 3 people at this table who agree and 2 people who think something. That's discussion. Okay? You're listening for all the I's, and out of the I's there is some we-ness that emerges. And the questions, of course, are what do we hear us saying? What do we hear God saying? Now the last point up here is the part of the practice. The response that your home table will come to is not a consensus, but a discerned we. We hear God saying to us that our description of communal experience of contemplation and discernment is. And the answer to that is 8 to 15 words only. In contemplative practices, it's referred to as distilled thought. Okay? And again, you're probably really good at this, but let me tell you, a lot of us, In order to say something, we need 8 paragraphs and a couple stories thrown in, okay? Distilled thought, that's why all the silence is necessary. So that we're not running our mouth with everything that we think. Now, where are the extroverts, by the way? Extroverts, be proud, raise your hands. Extroverts. Is that all the extroverts? No way. Extrovert. Where are the introverts? All right, where are the people who don't know who they are? Okay. This kind of process is an introvert's dream, okay? And for the extroverts, it's a journey to Dante's hell, okay? See, because extroverts get at their distilled thought by having 800 to 1,000 words, right? Which is why the silence is such a help for all the introverts, okay? We don't have to listen to the extroverts. Okay? No, but seriously, it's a discipline for both styles, both introvert and extrovert. So my sense is, because I know that we've all across the country been trying to practice this way of being with each other in conversation, and I'm calling it now discernment. But the end goal is to have a distilled thought response that is common. And the suggestion is I'm actually being generous, it's usually 7 to 10 words, but I'm being generous, 8 to 15 words. And please do not wordsmith. It's not about getting all the right words, it's about listening. Listen under the words, and what you're listening for at your home table, I'm going to ask you to go right to the communal experience, because your own personal experience, you might want to share in another kind of venue. But the second question on your paper, how would you describe your communal, your Brentwood experience of contemplation and discernment? How would you describe it? So that will be the work that you're doing at your home table. Your goal is certainly listening to each one, and then getting your table to have a common distilled response of 8 to 15 words. Okay? Now let me just tell you where this is going so that the teachers in here know what the lesson plan is. Right? The second part of the process is, after a period of time, I will invite you to go, each of you, to go to another table. And it can be usually when this is done in a chapter process, you have the tables assigned and all. We're just practicing this today. But you will take, like if I'm at a table right now, a home table, when I go to another table, I'm with 6 or 7 or 8 other people who have been at 6 or 7 or 8 other tables. I do not take Carol Zinn to that communal table. I take my home table to that communal table. So it is a process by which, when you sit at your communal table, you're actually sitting with, in most cases, at least 25% of the room. You're having a conversation with 7 and 8 other tables. Do you see how that works? Okay? And the process is the same, except now at your communal table, you don't have diverse individuals, you have diverse tables. And everybody is there carrying their home communal discernment. So it's a real discipline to kind of let yourself go and make sure that you carry what your home table has discerned. And same process, listen, speak, pause in between. Now you're listening to the we at the communal table that's really now a much larger we. It's almost like if I asked each of you now to come up here and sit with, people who are at, mostly tables have what, 2, 4, 6, 8, to sit with 8 other tables. Make a big circle of 8 tables. That's the second level of conversation you're going to have. It's an incredible way, process-wise, to be able to get a sense of what are we saying. And again, the response is the same at the communal table. In 8 to 15 words, what are we saying is our communal experience as Brentwood of contemplation and discernment. Okay? Is everybody clear on the process? It's actually pretty simple, okay? Because it's the same process at each table. All right? Is everybody all right? All right, so I'm going to invite you, I have about 10 after 11, I'm going to invite you to about 20 minutes of home table. And again, this is practice, so just say to yourself, this is the first half hour of 10,000 hours of practicing this, okay? I say that because I'm sure there's somebody in this room that's like, oh my God, we've got 20 minutes. If she would just stop talking, we could get started, you know. That's not going to help you, okay? So about 20 minutes to be with your home table, and your goal is to be able to carry what you as a home table have communally come to as a response to, what does this table think Brentwood's experience of contemplation and communal discernment is? Okay? All right, so I'll check with you in about 20 minutes, then I'm going to ask you to move to another table. Then it'll be time for lunch. All right? Okay. Again, don't forget all your skills. Look at each other. No comment in between. Just listen to everybody first. And then you can have contemplative conversation with each other. So this is not a discussion and it's not a conversation. It is communal contemplative discernment. Very different process.